guys, and welcome back to my channel. I can't believe it's already March, but here we are doing the February recap of all the books that I have read. I think next month for my recap I want to do more of little video snippets throughout the month, and that will make it easier to get out a recap video and be more interesting, and I'll remember a lot more of the book titles. But this one is a sit down, let's go through all the books that I've read, and hopefully it won't be too long. So I read 3,142 pages and 11 books in the month of February. So starting out with the first book that I finished was The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens. And this book I started at the very beginning of the year. This is one of my 23 classics for the year. And so it took me a really long time listening to this to get through it, but I did finish it in the month of February. I did end up giving this 4 stars. I actually liked it a lot more than I thought. I've read a lot of Dickens before and not really liked any of the stuff, but I liked this one because it was more separated storylines. And so you got like little snippets, chapters of what was going on, but then there was still the friends going throughout the book, and their personalities was really fun. So if you don't know what The Pickwick Papers is about, it's basically just the adventures of 4 friends traveling around England. And there's one part in the book where he says that basically every time they meet a woman, something wrong happens, something goes wrong, some misunderstanding. And so it's quite comical in a lot of places. But really, like, the true hero of the story was someone who is not actually one of the 4 friends, but Sam Weather, the valet. He was just really funny and enjoyable and just a cherry on top of the story. So I did actually pretty enjoy this one, and it had a nice happy ending. So if you're into Dickens or England around that time, I would recommend listening to this book. And then the next book I read was The Fifth Avenue Story Society by Rachel Hawke. This has been on my want to read for a really long time, and then I was looking on the book outlet and I found this one, and so I started reading it. I really enjoyed this. I ended up giving it, I think, 3.5 stars. Here's the thing, this book was really well written, and I was definitely glued to it in like the 2 days that I was reading it. But I did not expect it to be a Christian book at all. So I was pleasantly surprised when there was a conversion story. Now, if it would have claimed to be a Christian fiction book, I probably would have been a little bit harsher with the theology in it, but because I wasn't expecting that, and I was just expecting it to be a regular fiction book, I was really surprised and thought that was really cool to have a character who was Christian. And I did like how it wasn't like all of the characters were having these conversion stories all throughout, because there's 4 or 5 different characters in here, part of the society. And so there's just one major conversion, and then all the rest end up going to church, and it was really neat just to see them starting to fall on the right path. And I would love to see another book with the rest of these characters coming to Christ and all that. So basically what happens is there's 5 different people who get an invitation to the Special Story Society. They don't know what the Story Society is, who set it up, what they're even supposed to be doing, but they end up meeting together every Monday night and getting to know each other. So 2 of the people have been divorced from each other, and then there's one woman who runs this makeup company, and a man who has been divorced, and then another man whose wife has died. And so they're all kind of trying to help each other get through hard seasons of their lives and encouraging one another, and it was really neat. The reason, though, that I didn't give it 5 stars or even 4 stars was because of the cleanliness. So there are a lot of references to intimacy in here, which I felt like could have been left out. A lot of them were in the context of marriage, looking back on their marriage, and so there definitely wasn't anything necessarily inappropriate in it. I just think that there could have been less references, and it would have been more clean for a younger audience. And also, there's mentions of suicide, one of the characters who's mentioned in the past, and then there's some talk about drugs, and then, of course, there's adultery leading to some of the divorce. So there's a lot of hard topics in here, and people who are trying to move on from all of these things that have happened in their past, but nothing of it was graphic, and I felt like she treated it in a good way to say, hey, look, people have hard lives, but you have to move on, and you have to find hope outside of what's going on in your life. So overall, I really did enjoy it, and if you are okay with reading some of those content things, I think you would really enjoy this book. It doesn't really have much to do with books, but it's kind of like a Hallmark movie. It's a little bit more realistic. Then a very short one that I listened to, it was like a 17-minute audiobook, was The Bet by Anton Chekhov. I wanted to read this for a long time. Someone recommended it to me as one of the easiest like Russian books to read, and I did end up giving it 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. It's the story of a lawyer and a banker who are having a conversation over which was more harsh, the death penalty or the life sentence. And so they make a bet that the lawyer cannot even stay in solitary confinement for 5 years. And he says, I'll stay there for 15 if you give me $1 million. So then you see, okay, what happens when he goes to the 15 years in prison. And it just has a really interesting ending. And although I don't necessarily agree with Chekhov's theology, I did think it opened up some really good questions and reminded me of Ecclesiastes. So I think you should definitely read it. It's a really short read or listen. And there's also some podcasts you can listen to that are really interesting and open up a lot of good questions on it. And then I actually read another book by Chekhov this month, and that was The Seagull. Now, I did not like this one very much. I ended up giving it 3 stars, but I think the reason was because it was a play, and plays are really hard to read and be able to fully enjoy. So I thought, I mean, it was interesting, but Chekhov, his goal was not necessarily to tell a story with this great plot, but more to just show a snapshot of the characters' lives and what did Russian life even look like. And so it definitely portrayed the hopelessness and the pointlessness of this Russian life that the people were leading. But I do kind of want to watch like the movie just to see all of the characters be brought together and to see more of that characterization that the play can't necessarily contain. But so far, I kind of like Chekhov, kind of don't. We'll see, maybe I'll have to read something else by him. A nonfiction book that I finished last month was A Biblical Counseling Process by Lauren Whitman. This was recommended to me by my ACBC supervisor. I ended up giving it 4 stars, even though I don't agree necessarily with everything that she said in here and all of her methodologies, because it's definitely more from a clinical standpoint, like less of a counseling relationship and more of a counseling center, because she's part of CCEF, which is a counseling center that is not part of necessarily one church. But I did learn so much from here, and I highlighted a lot of things that I'll definitely be coming back to. So basically she goes through what does the beginning of a counseling process look like, what does the middle look like, and what does the end look like. How do you start that relationship off, and how do you finish the counseling sessions. And so I thought that there was a lot of good insights in here and a lot of things that I will be taking and applying, a lot of things that I need to do better at. But she does emphasize this is a biblical counseling process. It is not the one. And so if there are things that you don't agree with that don't really work for you, you can just leave them behind and take what you need. So I'll definitely be doing this and not using every single one of her things, but I think it made me think about, oh, what am I doing in the biblical counseling room that maybe I should be doing better. And she makes a good point about that we're ambassadors for Christ. So what we're doing, we're representing Christ in that counseling room. And so we have to think hard about, okay, how am I presenting myself to this person? Am I really doing an adequate job of gathering all the information and addressing that information? So if you are a biblical counselor, I think you should really read this and just be able to get a good grasp on what that 10-week or whatever, however long relationship should look like. And then one I listened to, which I'm sure a lot of people are going to get angry at me for this review, but the Endurance about Shackleton's voyage to Antarctica, I ended up giving it 2.5 stars, and I saw so many people talking about how good this was. But like I've mentioned with how I don't like Chekhov because he doesn't have the strong plot, the strong goal that he's moving toward, I was just really disappointed in this book because he's going to Antarctica. His goal is to cross over Antarctica. He gets barely into like the ice and gets stuck. And then the rest of the book is just them kind of wandering around in a circle trying to survive. Was it amazing, their survival story? Yes. But the way that the book was written didn't really convey to me the fact that, look, they didn't have any supplies or anything that they needed to be able to survive. I kind of felt like throughout the book that they had what they needed and they were wandering around and kind of waiting. There was a little bit of danger, but I think a lot of it had to do with just the way the book was written didn't intrigue me and have me like on the edge of my seat. And I was just disappointed in the end because they had this goal of getting across Antarctica and then they really did nothing by the end of the book, except obviously survival is a big thing, but that wasn't the main goal that they were going for. So that was just disappointing to me. It was really interesting, though, to see Shackleton and his leadership. He was a very good leader, and he never showed his men just how hopeless it was. He always was very encouraging and just constantly leading them and never giving up, even though he knew that it was probably a hopeless mission. And they made it through because he just really pushed through, which was really fascinating to see how strong of a leader he was. But other than that, I don't know. I didn't like the book that much. Another nonfiction book I read was The 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You by Tony Rinke. I gave this 4 stars, not necessarily because there was anything wrong with it. I really enjoy it. I would recommend it to people. It's just not going on my list of like my favorite books ever. I really liked his God, Technology, and the Christian Life better because I think he brought out more things in that I had never heard of before. But I really enjoyed how this brought out 12 specific different ways that spiritually you're changing just because you're so addicted to technology. We're addicted to distraction, then we end up ignoring the people who are right in front of us. We crave that immediate approval. We lose our literacy. We forget how to actually read. We feed on the produced, and we become like what we like. We get lonely, we get comfortable in secret vices, we lose meaning, we fear missing out, we become harsh to one another. That one I could see right away after reading the chapter. And we lose our place in time. We forget what is going on right now, and we're always looking back or looking forward, and we get really confused about where we are in time, which I can totally see that. So I just really enjoyed how he pointed out these specific things that you can actually see applications to in your life. It was very convicting and just brought up some really good questions. Does technology aid our relationship with other people, or does it hinder us in our obedience to biblical commands? Does it change the way that we interact with others? So just really good questions that he brings up, and I really appreciate that Tony Rinke is not the kind of person who says, throw your phone out the window. He says, look, there are redeeming qualities to it. It's very useful. He uses it all the time. We just have to consider what effect it's having on our spiritual health. And so I would definitely recommend this to anyone who has any kind of technology. So everybody. Another audiobook that I listened to was Set the Stars Alight by Amanda Dykes. I gave this 3 stars. I have liked a lot of Amanda Dykes' books, and I think she is a good writer. Maybe just writes too much description and too flowery. In the very beginning, I could tell I don't really like the writing style in this book. I didn't actually know that it was a dual timeline, which if you've been around on this channel, you know that I don't really like. But the characters really captured my attention in the beginning, so I wanted to press through and see where their stories went. I really liked Dash, and Frederick was pretty good. Her heroes are always pretty good that she writes in her books. And so basically the story is of 2 people who were childhood friends back in like 2000s. They're reunited in 2020, and they have their own prestigious jobs. And they have basically this historical scavenger hunt. But then it switches to the other perspective of the 1800s aboard the ship the Jubilee, which later on Dash and the main character, they're looking for the Jubilee and what happened to it. I really like the reunited friendship / love aspect. That's always something that's going to get me. They're childhood friends, and then 20 years later they come back and they end up getting married. I think that's a really cool trope. But I have absolutely no idea how the story wrapped up. It was maybe 4 stars until the end. It was just very quick. I completely missed it. And I talked to some other people, and they said that it didn't really make any sense. It was wrapped up too nicely and not very realistic. So that's why I didn't really like it, because you're kind of built up to this whole thing. Like, how is this going to connect? You figure out that obviously this old thing that happened in the 1800s is somehow connected to her family today. But it just doesn't pack a punch at the end. So that was kind of disappointing. Then I read The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. This was actually a family read aloud, and reading this really made me realize that I love The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. I just saw so many new things as I was reading it this time, and so many cool symbols stood out to me that he put in there. I saw a lot of the allusions, the lessons that you can apply to real life, and I did listen to a podcast on it that helped explain some of the things that he was trying to say in there. So I thought that was really cool. And if you're going to read any of the Narnia books, I would really recommend reading this one, because I think it's enjoyable. It's the journey story that has been around for a long time, and it's just really fun to read. Then The Death of Ivan Ilyich and Confession by Tolstoy. This was really interesting. This edition took this fictional work that he wrote about this man who's dying of he doesn't know what, and he's trying to figure out what is the meaning of life, why do people die, how can we remedy God being good and there being evil, and then Tolstoy's own confession. I ended up giving this 4 stars. So for Ivan Illich, I read that back in January, and I thought it was well written, it was full of really good lessons, and if Tolstoy was a Christian, then I think there would have been a really great ending. And then Confession, he kind of goes through how are the different ways we can think about evil in the world. Like, here's the 4 different responses we can have. We can totally ignore it, or we can believe in God, or I don't remember all the different ones he had. So he almost got there. He was so close to the truth. But he was very practical about it. He kind of discarded faith and said that, well, faith isn't possible, so we have to be able to actually visually see something and to prove the truth. And he really, I think at the end, it seemed like he turned to orthodoxy, so not Christianity, but very religious, following the rules and the traditions and all that. He was very close, but not quite there. So I thought this was enjoyable, and I like Russian stuff. But it was just sad that he didn't come to the right conclusion. And then the very last book I read was The Sweetness at the Bottom of the Pie by Alan Bradley. This one has been going around on a lot of reading groups, and it is a mystery book told from the perspective of a 13-year-old girl, I think. And it was really fun to listen to. The narrator was really good, and it wasn't super terrible, like graphic. And the girl was not creepy. She was just a normal, everyday girl. After reading The Crooked House, I was kind of scarred. And the main character really was. She was very brilliant, and it was interesting to see the family dynamic. And it was kind of written in the style of Agatha Christie, but this is a modern book. I did feel like once you meet the killer, though, it was pretty predictable that he was the killer. There wasn't like a huge plot twist at the end, but if you're looking for kind of like, I don't know, cozy mystery type thing with a main character that's younger, you might really enjoy this book. So I feel like this month was actually a pretty good month. I had a lot of 4 and 5-star reads, a lot of books that I would recommend and not too many terrible ones. So let me know down in the comments what your favorite books were from last month, and I hope that you are already off to a great start in the month of March. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye.